Dhoruba, I wanted to kick things off with you. What is your assessment of what is going on in the Middle East? And I want to ask this question from the standpoint of the popular narrative that has been floating around in mainstream media, and we're seeing articles and columns and commentary, is that the black political class, the black civil rights movement, doesn't want to have anything to do with Palestine, that they're firmly behind Israel. We've seen that the Israeli lobby has gone on to a lot of black college campuses. They've been flying people over. We've seen articles come out, and we're seeing that a lot of leaders who normally would speak on atrocities have been completely silent, and they've been nowhere to be seen. What is your take on this, especially with the claim that the black civil rights movement would never be in support of Palestine, since I think you're part of that black liberation struggle. If anybody, you, 19 years, political prisoner, Black Panthers, what do you say about all this?
Well, I think that the silence of the black political elite and many so-called black reformists and activists is a consequence of the interference with political power on behalf of the African community. AIPAC and the Zionist lobby in Washington, and Jewish money across the country has been a major factor historically in the civil rights movement. The NAACP was founded by leftist progressive Jews. The Communist Party that Du Bois entered and eventually broke with was dominated by Ashkenazi European Jews who had migrated to the U.S. and were part of the leftist movement. Jews in the United States have always, and for the most part, played a progressive role in trying to deal with issues of institutional racism, because they were often the times of so-called anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish attacks. They came from the old Europe, the old imperial Europe, where Zionism was born. Zionism was a reactionary nationalist response to the pogroms and hatred of Jews by Europeans, by European governments, by European cultures and peoples. It's a construct of the Ashkenazi Jews, and it was an adjunct. It was always an instrument of imperialism. If anyone remembers or recalls the British in World War I, after World War I, when the Ottoman Empire was divided up and divvied up, the Balfour Agreement, which was made by the then Foreign Secretary Balfour of Great Britain, he made a secret agreement with Theodore Herzl, who was one of the founding members of modern Zionism, to find a homeland within the now disintegrated territories of the Ottoman Empire for the Jewish people, for the Ashkenazi European Jews. It was understood that this was essentially a European settler arrangement, much like South Africa. It's a European settlement. It's a European settler strategy to place within the lands of Muslims and Arab-speaking people a European military power and force that can regulate and control the region militarily and geopolitically. A lot of folks don't understand, and I repeat this over and over again, every crisis that we have today is a consequence of injustices that happened yesterday.
Right,
and
that's a hard pill for people to swallow.
Yes. And Britain and France are directly responsible for the turmoil that we have in the Middle East today. And this can be said in whenever we look at any of these problems. It was Britain and France that established the state of Syria, the modern state of Syria after World War II. It was, I mean, after World War I, it was the British and the French that established Lebanon and made sure that the ethnic divisions were of such a nature that there would always be a pro-Western elite that was in power. Of course, the demographics of Muslims and Christians and phalangists changed over the years, and the Muslims multiplied quicker. So that whole demography has been changed. That led to the crisis in Lebanon. We see that with the European settler state of Israel, which was a British mandate under the British after the fall of the Turkish Empire. It was a British mandate, and
we should could we clarify what we mean by mandate, because I think people use that word but don't really understand the particulars. That it was almost like, if I could use this as an example, the westward migration here in the U.S. Like, we'll give you some we'll give you some acreage, we'll give you some money, and all these savages, quote unquote Native Americans, you can move them out, and that will be, they don't get no rights. And was this kind of the thing that we're talking about with
well, sort of, but I mean, I would want to address that, too, in terms of us understanding white supremacy in America and the fact that African people have no wealth, and that wealth accumulation is the path, of course, and the basis for political power. But that's a whole nother analysis. But, yeah, what I want to say was the British mandate. Okay, at the end of World War I, the victors of World War I, which was the United States, Britain, France, Belgium, the lowlands, the victors of that won that war, and I call it the first imperialist war of the 20th century. They won that war against the Central Powers, which were consisted of Germany, Austria, Hungary, the Balkans, much of what we know today as Lithuania. All of these, they were on the side, and the Turks, they were on the losing side. And the Turkish Ottoman Empire spanned the entire Mediterranean for over 500 years. In fact, the Turkish Empire extended to the very gates of Vienna. You could ride outside of Vienna for 50 miles and you would be at the border of the Turkish Ottoman Empire.
Right.
And so when we see what happened in Herzegovina and Bosnia, this is all a consequence of the long history of Muslim domination of these regions, and that once the political order disintegrated, it turned into this vicious genocidal civil war where neighbor was killing neighbor. We can go across the world and see that, whether it was Rwanda, whether it's in the Congo, it's always been this. And the auspices of this has always been the European imperialist powers.
Where the borders are divided so that you have...
across cultures, across religions, across ethnicity. And so what I'm trying to say is Transjordan was a protectorate of the of the League of Nations. The League of Nations was an organization that was put together after World War I to ensure, quote, that there would be peace between the world powers, that there would be no more wars like World War I. It was the precursor or the predecessor of the United Nations. And so when the Turkish Empire was divvied up, when the Ottoman Empire collapsed and the modern state of Turkey was founded, there was all of these territories in North Africa, in the Middle East, in the Far East that used to be under Turkish rule that were no longer under Turkish rule.
Right.
The Turks were not Arabs, are not Arabs. But most of their territories that they administratively controlled under the Caliphate were Arab nations. The predominant people were Africans and Arabs. And so when the Turkish Empire was disintegrated, the British, mainly the British and the French, were given certain territories to administer until the peoples in those territories could find some form or some manner of self-determination. So the British control of Palestine was an administrative control of the Palestinian territory in the Middle East. Okay, conferred by the League of Nations. Of course, the League of Nations failed in its job to stop another war. They allowed Abyssinia or Ethiopia to be invaded by the Italians and did nothing. They allowed the Japanese to annex Manchuria and invade parts of Southeast Asia and did nothing. So the League of Nations collapsed. And and then World War II came along. And it was in that interim between World War I and World War II that the former imperial powers, in order to thwart Germany's access to oil and access to that region, began to recruit European Jews into different military brigades. The British had a whole brigade of Zionists, a whole brigade of European Jews who fought in World War II, and they were repatriated to the territories, the so-called legal mandate territories.
Okay, so that's how that mandate breaks down then.
Yeah, the mandate broke down with the end of World War II, and the enormous amount of sympathy that was had in the world for the Holocaust, for the murder of millions of non-Germans, Jews and Roma people and gays and leftists and all of those people that the Nazis killed, but mainly because the Zionist movement.
Go ahead.
Because the Zionist movement at that time, during World War II, the Zionist movement was part and parcel of the Allied effort to liberate Nazi-occupied Europe.
Right.
And so they managed to parlay that vacuum after World War II into a state.
Right.
If you know, there's a movie coming out called Exodus.
Right.
And it's going to glorify and show how the Zionist movement manipulated the sympathies of the world after World War II to find the modern state to establish the modern state of Israel. So Israel is essentially a European settler state. It's a construct of Europe after World War II. It has nothing to do with the Palestinians in any other fashion than that. Right. The settlers in Israel are not indigenous to that land. They are almost all European. They are Ashkenazis as opposed to Sephardic Jews. They are racist, and this is expressed in their policies and in their treatment of Ethiopian and non-Jews of color. It's a settler state. So when you have a situation like Gaza, where Obama and the U.S. government and their Israeli supporters come forth and say Israel has a right to defend itself, and that Hamas or these organizations like Hamas don't recognize Israel's right to exist, that right there is telling you that Israel existentially, as a European settler state, has to have its existence legalized, recognized, regularized by everybody. And because they're on a people's land and they've been annexing this land illegally in violation of hundreds of UN declarations. They've been establishing the settlements, they've been expanding settlements, they've been building walls to create, dividing Palestinians from Israelis, to create on the ground the impossibility of a Palestinian state. And so when Hamas's recognition of Israel is irrelevant, because Israel is a fait accompli in terms of its military power. It is what it is. It is there already. That's like telling me if someone comes into your living room and says, "Well, look, this house was given to me by God, before you moved in, and this living room is mine. But I'm gonna let you live in the attic. You understand? And you could stay in the attic, and you could use the kitchen when I'm not using it. But this is my house, and you need to recognize that this is my house. Now, of course, you who've been delegated to the attic, you're never going to recognize that as their house. Right. But now, if they got all the power and the strength, and there's nothing you physically can do about it, you have to recognize the fact
it's
that they're there.
You can't deny.
Okay, so it's a false notion that the Palestinians have to recognize Israel's right to exist, and that if they don't recognize Israel's right to exist, then therefore they're a terrorist organization and Israel has a right to defend itself. No settler state has a right to defend stolen territory. No settler state it should be immune from resistance of the people whose land was stolen from them. So the whole paradigm of the dialogue has been twisted so that we in the West, who support Israel to the tune of billions of dollars a year in military aid and economic aid, are believing that we're supporting a democracy of people just like us in a region where people are trying to take women back to the 12th century, and these are some crazy terrorists who don't want to live in peace. That's not the dialogue at all. And we need to understand that even if a ceasefire was to morph into a longer peace negotiation, we're going to revisit the same contradiction probably in the next few months, if not in the next year or so.